Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. My name is Omar and today I've got a different sort of video. Today I'm going to be reacting and sort of talking over my plays, what I did, looking at my own games of the Planeswalker podcast, Planeswalker Diaries podcast Patreon tournament, which I participated in last Sunday as of recording this, and I won second place in that tournament with a pretty good prize. The games were fun, and some weird things happened during the tournament, so I hope you enjoy. Also, one more important thing to note, I have a new microphone. I don't know if you can see it, but it's the Razer Siren Mini, and it is miles better than this garbage that I was using earlier. So now, hopefully, the audios for all of my videos and streams and all that going forward should be much, much better, so I'm really happy about that, and I hope that it improves the quality of my videos. Now, without that out of the way, let's actually get into the part you came here for. So, I will preface this by saying that I am playing Sultai midrange in Historics, the pretty stock list, Growth Spirals, Urros and Nieces and Crosses, Thoughtseize and Fatal Push as interaction, and a couple more spicy one-ofs. Alright, and I've also sped up the footage to something like 150% because I took a lot of time thinking as this is a tournament, so hopefully this should make things somewhat more interesting. Alright, so my first match was against Bimin Plays MTG, and if I'm correct, actually I don't even know what they were on, so I guess I'll have to find out with you guys. And yeah, I kept this hand, I think, mostly on the back of Urro. I also knew what my opponent was playing, so I'm pretty sure they were on like blue-white control or something, right? Oh, right, yeah, this was the Sultai mirror. So I kept this hand. It's got a solid top end. Hydroid Crisis is really good in this matchup. If Uro wasn't in this hand, I wouldn't have kept, but Uro bridges me from 3 to 5 pretty nicely. My opponent was on the 4-color mid-range deck, so I have a little bit of an advantage in this matchup as they have a couple of dead Yasharns, but on the other hand, Mythos of Nethroi, which I think they had 1 or 2 of was also pretty good. So my opponent also had an Uro. They thought he's my Uro, which I'm not super worried about. I did miss out on getting a chance to ramp. And now this Castle Lochthwain was actually really, really important in this matchup, since we were doing a lot of grinding, and so having repeatable card draw was just awesome. And also, the fact that it costs a bunch of life doesn't actually matter that much in this matchup. At the moment, I am getting pressured by Nisa, but most of the time, you end up on a pretty high life total with Uro and Cross's life gain, and the fact that we're both pretty mid-rangey control decks. So here, I'm a little bit worried about this Nisa. If my opponent has a Crosses, I could be in trouble. So all I can really do is just play a 2-2 Crosses, and then I'm planning to Fatal Push my opponent's land, but I'm going to do it at their upkeep, or in response to whatever. Alright, so they just play in a Breeding Pool tapped, and I Fatal Push, which is good for me because I'm denying the mana. Now, if they do have a Crosses here, I will be in trouble, because they get to draw a bunch of cards, but I also don't want them to have a counterspell here, so if they tap out, that's good for me, because this Casualties of War, which is incredibly good in this matchup. I get to kill the Nisa, and a land, and a creature land. It's just really insane. A huge blow. I think my opponent had 2 Aether Gusts main, which I was worried about, as they go for the Yasharn here, which isn't super threatening. They don't even get to fetch a Plains, so at this point, I was really, really hoping that they didn't have the Aether Gust. This is sort of the turning point of the game. Once I got this Casualties of War, I was way ahead. So I get this 3-for-1, deny the mana. I also got to kill all their white mana, which was nice. And then I decided to attack, seeing as if they had like a single removal spell, it made my blocks worse. As my opponent gets in with Yasharn, and I don't think they have enough cards. No, they do have enough cards in the graveyard for Uro, but that's fine because I've got this Extinction event that I can play on Odd. So they play the Uro, and I'm actually not far off my Uro as well. So I was feeling pretty good here. My opponent double shocks, so I'm a little bit worried about Aether Gust now, but I think it's a Growth Spiral because my opponent didn't have an Aether Gust earlier, and I decided to go for the Nisa into Extinction event because it was so much better for me if they didn't have Aether Gust, and then just I could leave both cross-eye back to block this Yasharn because I didn't want Nisa taking a bunch of damage. Or rather, no crosses, yeah. Wow, I just can predict my own plays from the past. I'm so smart. So yeah, Extinction Event here, and I breathe the Savage Leaf as they play in a Growth Spiral. Hit Odd, and it hits their Uro, which is great for me. Exile is especially relevant here. I think it's one of the reasons why Extinction Event isn't just strictly worse than something like the -4/-4 one. I think I'm running a mix 2-in-1, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so we're going to go for the double block here. If they spend a removal spell on cross this, it's fine. They sort of get a blowout, but I don't really care. And now I just get to cross this with Nissa, and the game is way over. It's super hard to come back from my opponent from just a massive amount of card advantage, an enormous beater. And here I'm not even going to go for the attack, valuing the extra card, and boom, Thoughtseize, and take their Extinction Event, which was their way of surviving, and that was a really easy game one. I just got out ahead faster, had the casualties, they didn't have the Gust, and now I have a bunch of stuff to bring in, and also a bunch of stuff to bring out because of these Fatal Pushes and Extinction Events. So I think I'm taking out a bunch of removal. Eliminate's actually solid here because Narset, as well as Uro, as well as Nissa lands, though I do actually end up trimming it because I have counters for Nissa, or Narset rather, now. Also, Maelstrom Pulse deals with it pretty well, and I need to cut one more card here. I'm deliberating it pretty hard. I was going off a sideboard guide, except my list was slightly different, so I was like one card off the sideboard guide, so I need to actually make decisions for myself, and I don't even remember what I cut. Might have been an Uro. Don't exactly remember. It was the second Maelstrom Pulse, yeah. I mean, I agree with that. Like, Maelstrom Pulse, especially now that I have Casualties of War, isn't that good. Never mind. Yeah, so cutting it out on one Uro I think is fine because in this matchup you end up drawing so many cards because, like, it's slow, so you get to draw a bunch of cards off, like Growth Spiral and stuff. So you eventually find your Uro, and your second Uro is not nearly as good as your first. And again, my opponent Thoughtseizes me on turn 1 taking my Uro, but that's sort of fine. I don't have any other great plays, so I'd love to draw a Growth Spiral. My opponent Thoughtseizes me again, but at this point, it's not even terrible. Now I'm getting close to just hard casting Uro on turn 4, and I mean, it's pretty decent, right? My opponent Growth Spirals, but they miss a land drop, and that's really, really important here because, while they did get to play a land off Growth Spiral, they didn't play a land for turn, and now they're missing lands again, and missing lands in this matchup is really, really bad. This matchup is all about having more mana than your opponent, and so missing on lands is really, really bad. And this also means that I get to Uro next turn, as I can Growth Spiral and Fabled Passage, end up with 4 mana. That's enough to cast Uro. And my opponent doesn't put in untapped blue mana, and now I just get to Uro, and it's all downhill for my opponent from there. This is a pretty easy match number 1, honestly. I just had better draws than my opponent. I don't think I necessarily outplayed them in any particular spot. I just did the obvious play, and it was just better than what my opponent was doing. So Uro comes in, it's just a massive beater. Not really much my opponent can do here, unfortunately for them. They're only on 4 lands. So they're just gaining life with Uro, but I get to play Narset next turn and just shut that off until they Thoughtseize me again. They've been practically burning themselves out. And there's the Nissa as well, just to rub salt in the wound. And now it's just pretty much over for my opponent. Do a bit of cycling through, trying to find something like a counter. I don't, but that's fine. I know right here actually was pretty bad. I should have animated Breeding Pool to bluff Aether Gust, but it didn't end up mattering. And I don't think it really would have ended up mattering, but it was still a wrong play. So just for reference, you should definitely bluff Aether Gust or Negate or Disdainful Stroke or whatever, even if you don't have it. So my opponent here Gusts Uro, which I thought was pretty interesting that they did it main phase. They could have done it after my draw step, which would have taken a lot of pressure off them, as I would have to wait another turn, but instead they just went for it main phase. I guess playing around some sort of counter. So that actually ended up pretty well for me, and now I get to put them to 2, and I get to Uro, and now my CMCs on the board are even, so I split up. I've got Uro, which is odd, and the lands which are even, so which is pretty good for me because my opponent could potentially like Extinction Event, remove my land, but not anymore. And the Search for Skanta, I'll also get to play out pretty much for free. So my opponent here, yeah, maybe a little bit salty. I can't blame them. This matchup was pretty unfortunate for them. They got mana screwed and sort of outdrawn. So I get to Uro here. They gained some life. If they had a removal spell from my Uro, that could be the beginning of a comeback. But they miss on their land again, and it's just over from there. So that was match number 1, and now we're heading on to match number 2. And this one was against Goblins. And so I'm feeling pretty good. This tournament is single elim, so I really can't lose any of my matches. But it was only like 25 or something people, if I remember correctly. So top 8 was coming pretty shortly after this. So I was really hoping to win this one. And knowing this was Goblins, I don't know, I think this is a pretty solid hand. I mean, it's not great. It's sort of one of those keep and lose hands, but I have 2 pieces of interaction and solid mana, so I don't think I can reasonably mulligan. My opponent does take a mulligan. Thoughtseize on a mulligan is pretty good for me, right? That's my reasoning. They lead on turn 1 Scurry Prospector, which is, I don't know, annoying. Annoying, I guess. And now this hand, and here's where my first misplay of the game. I should have just taken Goblin Matron, and I think I was planning to, but misclicked. And this really was really bad for me. Because now they get to Matron, and what they tutored up was Kranko, which I agree with. And unfortunately, I just flooded really badly here. So all I had to do was lands. I kept cycling off trying, but I guess I'll just commentate as the match goes. And yeah, this is pretty unfortunate. Had I taken the Instigator, I wouldn't have to deal with the Kranko. Maybe I messed up my lands a little bit there. I had to shock in, but... And yeah, when here I declined to put a land in, I don't even know. I think I would, like, selected the wrong land and wanted to undo it, and my brain just sort of malfunctioned. And this was actually really, really bad, because this meant I couldn't cast Uro this turn. I only had 5 cards in graveyard, so I had to just cycle Zagoth's Triumph instead. Had I been able to play Uro, I would have been in a better spot. And again, I think I should have just growth spiraled main phase to see if I drew Extinction Event, or not Extinction Event, to see if I drew a Fatal Push, because then I could Fatal Push Kranko, but I didn't draw it, so I didn't really get punished. But yeah, I'm still playing from behind here. They've got a Kranko that's going to make a bunch of goblins, so it's pretty useless, and now I really need to hit an Extinction Event. It's like the one card that gets me out of this, because I can Extinction Event on even and mop up the Kranko and the Wily Goblin, as well as any goblins they might make in response, and then I'd be in a good spot, but I don't hit it. So I spend a while thinking, what are my possible outs? Can I draw like a couple removal spells? Or like a removal spell if there's growth spell or something. And yeah, so I decide I'll just stick it out, cast this growth spiral, whatever. Put a breeding pool into play, and just pass the turn. You know, like I'm probably dead, right? I'm gonna make some goblins, and yeah, they just got lethal damage. It was unfortunate for me, but what can you really do? So that was game 1. I was playing pretty bad because I think I both played badly and misclicked, and I think I could have pretty easily won that game 1. So I wasn't feeling too great, but I was pretty confident in my sideboard. I've got a Grafdigger's Cage and all these Gusts to bring in, as well as these Disdainful Strokes. I get to take out some of the slower cards, like Crosses doesn't really do a ton, Casualties of War isn't great. And of course I'm worried about Herald's Horn for my opponent, because that's a card that I can't deal too easily with, but I do have these Maelstrom Pulses, which are pretty strong against it. And yeah, I just decided to try and look at that. And I think I'm favored in this matchup. I have a bunch of Wraths, and I can turn the corner pretty easily, so especially on the play. And I was feeling pretty good. And this hand is actually really good. I've got no sort of growth spiral, which is really what this hand is missing, but I've got Extinction Event and Disdainful Stroke for Muxus, and there's my growth spiral effect with Uro. So now my opponent doesn't turn 3 Muxus me, so I get to cast this Extinction Event if they get too close to casting something bad for me. And here was great. I just got to cast Nissa, hold up Disdainful Stroke / Growth Spiral. They can't really deal with my Nissa, so this is a really, really good having the opportunity to take a turn off to cast Nissa. Had they put more pressure on the board rather than this Herald Horn, I think I would have been in a much worse spot. But as it is, things just turned out really well for me. And my opponent plays a second Herald Horn, and just a Goblin Instigator, which I'm still not worried about. Though the second Herald Horn does mean that they're going to be able to outcast me. And I draw this Maelstrom Pulse, which can hit both these Herald Horn, but I think I forgot to go for it. Yeah, I did. I didn't untap my black mana, which I think was pretty bad. And I think my opponent also messed up this turn. I was worried about getting double Moxist here. I definitely should have untapped the Zagoth Chime, which killed both Herald Horn. So again, I just didn't play super well. Mostly by just not having practiced enough with this deck. But I think from here on out, I played pretty decently. Yeah, my opponent just passes the turnover, which is perfect for me. I think I just forgot that I could hit these Herald Horns. So this game would have been much easier. And I think my opponent realized that I was making a mistake by not hitting their Herald Horns. So I think that's why they niced me. And now they didn't go for a triple block on the land, which I wasn't expecting. I just want to put pressure on them. And this is really the turn that I was worried about, because my opponent plays 2 Moxes, already hit 1. They have mana for a second. I'd only be able to Disdainful Stroke 1, and I could potentially lose a game I shouldn't have ever lost. So now they sacrifice the Instigator to the Phyrexian Tower, which is a little bit worrying. I'm not exactly sure why they did it. I tapped this way, I think, so I could keep up black mana for this Eliminate, even post-combat. Yeah, now my opponent just plays nothing, and I easily win. To untap another land with Nisa and kill them. So yeah, I didn't get punished for my bad play, which was nice. Now game 3 was actually pretty fun. So game 3, I keep this really great hand. I've got double Growth Spiral, 2 removal spells. My opponent took another mulligan, so I'm feeling pretty good. I am on the draw, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it's fine, right? And now I get to Growth Spiral and kill their Conspicuous Snoop, which is good because I don't want to let them get value off the top of their deck, so they give me the thanks. And this was just a really good play because it's so mana efficient. So I Growth Spiral main here, trying to hit something. I don't think it's worth Maelstrom Pulsing this Goblin Chieftain because I want to just Extinction Event a couple 3-drops. And they play another War Chief, which is perfect for me. So I'm feeling really great. The only thing that can really kill me is a Muxus here. And I have an Eliminate for a Haster, so feeling pretty decent. Again, this Herald's Horn comes down and a Phyrexian Tower. So they've got most likely just a Muxus in hand, and this was a really interesting decision point. So I wanted to go for the Uro, but I didn't. And here's the reason why. I think I'm going to win this game almost no matter what. So I don't want to lose to a Muxus. I only have an Aether Gust in hand, but I think if I can play Muxus and still hold up mana, even if they do have, or play Uro and still hold up mana, and even if I gust their Muxus, I'm much more likely to win the game. So I don't think it's risking it, because if they just Muxus, hit like a Haster and a Krenko, it's just lights out on a game that I'm currently way ahead in. So I decided just to pass the turnover. And, well, they play the Muxus that I was expecting, and I gust it. Don't think I can really do much else. And again, I just have to cast this Uro, right? So I'm really, really hoping to draw some sort of answer to this Muxus, because I don't want to just randomly die. And boom, there it is, Grafdigger's Cage. And that is where the game just straight up ended. I play Grafdigger's Cage, play Pulse on Herald's Horn to deny my opponent card advantage, and it's really just over. They get to play a 4/4, which is cool, I guess, but I get to attack with Uro, draw Fatal Push, and pass the turnover. And now this Krenko is actually a really good draw for my opponent. Now I need some way to kill a Krenko before it gets too out of hand. And I think I draw it. Yeah, that's a Nisa. So I decide to cast a Nisa, as that's just additional pressure, and I want to get this game over with before my opponent can find like an Abrade for my Grafdigger's Cage. So I find a second Uro, which is just perfect here because it enables Revolt, and here there's really no coming back from my opponent. So yeah, and I even draw a second Fatal Push, though not super useful since my opponent doesn't have a target. Honestly, not having a removal spell because you've killed all your, not having target for your removal spell because you've killed all your opponent's creatures is not really the worst problem to have in the world. And now I won match 2, so I was feeling pretty good. In match 3, I get a bye, so that's wonderful. I think I'm in the top 8 after match number 2, and I get a bye in the top 8 because there are only 5 people in the top 8, so it's technically a top 5 because of how the tournament structure was. So I get a bye. So I'm like, cool, I get to skip straight to the semifinals, which is really lucky, honestly. 5 people, I get the bye. It was because I had the lowest what's it called, ranking. So I like go eat lunch, come back after like 45 minutes, and yeah, I have another bye, which is totally not what was supposed to happen. You're not supposed to get 2 byes in a row, especially not in a tournament when you're like in the top 8 getting byes, top 5, whatever. So I get another bye, so I'm just heading straight to the finals. So I'm just feeling pretty good, but also like, and there's like some controversy. They almost stopped the match to make me play, but they end up just not doing it, I think for coverage purposes. So yeah, this is really incredibly lucky for me. Obviously I can say like, oh, you didn't deserve to be in the finals, like all that. Yeah, I got pretty lucky, but I don't know, what can you do? And yeah, so that's pretty nice. And I think they confirmed that it was not supposed to happen. They messed something up while doing the tournament. And yeah, so my footage from the finals got corrupted. So from now on, I'll be using footage from the official stream, which was from my opponent, Mythic Richard's POV. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but I guess we'll make do what we have with what we have. And here, I think I mulled to 6 and kept a hand with no sort of like, I bottomed, I think, a Fatal Push here, and I was feeling pretty good because I had hand without any dead cards. Really, in this matchup, having dead cards as Sultai, because you've got a bunch of like extinction events and Fatal Pushes, really, really sucks. So I was feeling pretty good, and this turn 2 Search Contest was also great for me. And unfortunately, my opponent also went turn 2 Search Contest super strong, and they even top decked it, which was just amazing for them. And I only learned that they top decked it after. I was a little bit salty because I think the Search Conto was one of the reasons I made this game a lot harder for sure. So now I Thoughtseize my opponent, and it's honestly a really hard choice for me. So I want to take their cast out so I can flip this Search Conto because I think that'll be really good. But I also want to take Absorb because it's a counterspell. I've got like an Uro in hand and no Nisa, so I'm not super worried about Absorb. But let's see what I take. And of course, I'm not super worried about these Shark Typhoons. Yeah, so I end up going for the Absorb. It's a sneeze. Yeah, so now my opponent has to decide if they want it to Fairy. And it's actually pretty interesting because the first time I'm seeing this from my opponent's point of view. I went over the match from my point of view later, or before my footage corrupted. And I don't know, I think I played pretty well overall. I definitely played better than my first 2 matches. So unfortunately, I didn't get to show that off. And now I just go for the crosses for 3. I was pretty low on action. I just need to draw something. So yeah, I mean, it's fine if they remove it, right? It's just another card in the graveyard. And I was a little bit worried because of this cast out, because it was going to hit my Search for Escanta, and I thought that Search for Escanta was really, really important. And so my opponent shocks in their Hallowed Fountain and past the turn, so I'm thinking, why didn't they do that main phase to play around counter spells and to hit my Search for Escanta? I was thinking maybe they wanted to hit a Nisa or something. So I just get in with crosses because there's really no reason not to. And now my opponent, and this was sort of weird, my opponent plays Cast Out, and I'm thinking, crap, this is going to hit my Search for Escanta. Maybe should have taken Absorb, or Cast Out Absorb. No, they hit my Hydroid Crisis. And now I know why they hit my crosses, because they wanted to resolve this Narset. And here I just went for the Fatal Push to get an extra 2 cards in my graveyard. That's just really it. I wanted 2 extra cards. Fatal Push is just super dead. So speeding up my Search for Content is really the best it's going to do. So my opponent graveyard's Teferi, so I had to assume that they had a second Teferi and or were low on lands. And I think if they don't cycle the Censor here, I think they missed on a land. So that was pretty good for me. Unfortunately, Narset is very hard for me to beat. A lot of the cards in this deck just draw cards. So not being able to do that was pretty rough for me. And my opponent attacked with a Shark here, which I think was wrong. Because if I had a Nisa, they'd get blown out. Just went for the Fatal Push again to flip us Kanta. But yeah, and just because I was unlikely to find a better use for it. So my opponent finally hits a land, and they go for the Teferi, I think. They activate Narset for first, of course, just to get to maximum information. Yeah, they hit Baffling End, which is pretty unlucky. Again, Baffling End, like my Fatal Push, isn't great in this matchup, and they just passed the turnover, which I thought was a little bit odd, because with this as Kanta, I think they're the ones forced to act, but I'm pretty fine with it. Knowing that they had the Teferi, I'm sure they were pretty bummed once they found out that I did not, in fact, have a counterspell in hand, as it was only a Triumph I was going to cycle. So yeah, and now I get to play this Nisa, but I don't get to kill Narset because of Shark Typhoon, which is annoying, and also because of like Cast Out and whatever, and they can even counter on the way down. So that was kind of unfortunate for me. And at this point, I'm stuck with almost no cards in hand because I had to waste a bunch of Fatal Pushes, and also because I was hitting my land drops. And I've got this as Kanta, and I decided to go for the Maelstrom Pulse on specifically Narset. And this was actually a pretty hard choice because I could also go for the Search for Kanta, or just save it for a Teferi. The problem was my opponent had a Memory in hand, and I did not want them to Memory with a Narset out. That would mean that I only got to draw 1 card, and I didn't think I would be able to recover from that. In hindsight, maybe it was better to hit the Search for Kanta, as they already had a full grip of cards, so Memory wasn't doing a ton, but that's just what I did at the time and why I decided to do it. Now my opponent libraries another land, or they might actually have graveyard it. I forget. No, I think they put it on top, if I remember correctly, which I was a little bit surprised about because I thought they were just going to flip us Kanta. Yeah, they did actually flip us Kanta, so never mind me. Yeah, now they play this Teferi and keep up open mana, which really sucks for me. Now they've got the Absorb up, and now it's super hard for me to come back once they untap with a Teferi. It's just pretty much lights out for me, right? I've got this counter up, so it's going to be pretty hard for me to kill the Teferi. And yeah, I grab a Nisa, play a land, try to attack, but I just got hit with the Absorb, and this is sort of where I mentally just go, oh well, I'm not winning this game. And I mean, I still decided to stick it out because who knows, my opponent might have all lands in hand, though that is of course unlikely given that they keep missing land drops, but who knows, maybe they've got just a bunch of Wrath of Gods, you know, and I could still like hit a Nisa or whatever, and I can still beat a Teferi. If I just cast a removal spell on Teferi, I mean, I've got this as Kanta going, it's really good. And my opponent just keeps missing lands. They discard to hand size here, which kind of sucks for them. And I don't know, it's a little bit odd that they didn't discard a Wrath of God. I would have thought maybe just like singleton effects, keeping one of each effect because they might want to hit an Uro. But yeah, I mean, who am I to judge? And now I just Kanta again and hit a Casualties. And this Casualties was really my key into getting back into the game. My opponent, as you can tell right now, does not actually have a counterspell in hand. They hit a Censor, that's only 1 mana, and the card I have in my hand, the other card, is in fact a Thoughtseize. So now I'm thinking, if I can Thoughtseize in the same turn, I can resolve this Casualties. Now my opponent hard casts Shark Typhoon, which I'm going to pause here because this is a really important moment. This was, I think, a massive mistake for them. Because they know I have Casualties in hand, so they're pretty much relying on the fact that I don't have a Thoughtseize. If I do have a Thoughtseize, they're going to be in huge trouble, And the Shark Typhoon, I think they're going to win the game without it. So I think it was just an unnecessary risk to go for the big, flashy, hardcast Shark Typhoon plan. And as you're about to see, it did not go well for them. This means that not only do they present an extra target for casualties, they now only have 1 mana to cast a single counterspell. Had they, and yeah, they don't even discard a Wrath of God here. They just got a Censor, which is really odd. And now I have the Thoughtseize, and now I think my opponent realizes that they've actually screwed up. Had they kept up all their mana, they could have just let the Thoughtseize resolve, cycled a couple of times towards the counter spell, like cycled their Censor or whatever. But this way, I just get to take their Absorb, and then I know that almost assuredly my casualties is going to resolve, as they only have this one cast out to cycle. And I mean, once the casualties resolves, it's going to be huge for me, right? They don't even cycle cast out to try to find a counter, which is a little bit odd, and they immediately top deck a Teferi. I was not actually aware that Teferi was top decked. So that actually makes me a little bit annoyed. But yeah, they top decked Teferi here, and I'm just going, again, like, ugh. I need to deal with another Teferi now. It's sort of annoying. And now they just don't play their land, which was really weird, considering they already have a bunch of cards in hand, so they wanted to cycle. And I'm just not sure why they did that. Maybe they were thinking that they're going to need all the cards they need to beat me, but I was already just whiffing on my search. I had this castle to activate on end step, but yeah. And my opponent just does a bunch of cycling as if there's some sort of dredge deck filling up the graveyard. And another draw a third Teferi, so even if I deal with the second one, it's still going to be pretty rough for me. And they can just keep drawing cards, which, I mean, is like what Teferi does, but I mean, Teferi is good. And I activate Castle Locklane in response here in case I draw a Growth Spiral and need to draw 2 cards in a turn. And my opponent just hits another Shark Typhoon here. And it is not looking good for me. And now my opponent just passes the turnover, untaps 2 lands, and discards it to hand size. And again, they're just bottoming, discarding lands as if they don't matter, which I think was really, really wrong. Having like extra mana to be able to cast more spells in your opponent, especially since we are both using all our mana every turn, just seems better. And these Wrath of Gods just aren't doing that much. So I'm not exactly sure my opponent did that, but they didn't get too punched for it. Yeah, now I'm just considering my options here. I've got like a couple dead cards in hand and this Crossus, and this Crossus doesn't draw cards because of Narset, which sucks. So I made it a 5/5, so I could also activate Ascanta, which I think is important, because if I just take my whole turn off to cast this Crossus, it's just going to get removed, and I'm not going to be able to come back from it. And now my opponent really starts tightening my screws. They play Grafdigger's Cage, so I can't cast any Uros. And I remember I had an Uro in hand at this point, so I was debating between casting Uro and casting Crossus, and I went for the Crossus instead, and I think that was correct, because I wouldn't be able to activate Ascanta. And honestly, it really didn't matter. At this point, at some point, I just switched from trying to win the game to running down my opponent's clock, because I knew that it's going to take them a while to kill me. I think it was when I hit this eliminate, I was like, oh, maybe, because now I get to kill the Narset and start drawing cards again. So I thought he's my opponent here, and then yeah, it just this game had a lot of powerful plays, but unfortunately my opponent just kept playing Teferis, and Teferi is just a ridiculous card. And I see a handful of gas, and I'm just thinking, oh no, it's gonna be really hard for me to come back from here. I cast Eliminate, and it just resolves, which I was a little bit surprised by, though I guess keeping Dissolve for Nisa is probably pretty good, right? Yeah, and there's that that I was holding, and I should play this Breeding Pool and tapped and pass the turn. My opponent plays a 3/3 shark here, which is whatever. I'm not under a ton of pressure. Right, I'm like activating Castle Locklane at periodically, so, and I am only on 12. It's a 4-turn clock, but I have a bunch of life gain in my deck, and I could just remove it with this extinction event. So my opponent just keeps Teferrying, They find a Castle Ardenvale, which is really bad for me because this means that their clock gets faster. And they start activating it main phase and then untapping with Teferi to make even more tokens. So just looking not great for me here. And I think exactly here, I hit both a Nisa and an Extinction event, and I took the Extinction event. I knew that I wasn't going to win this game. I think the commentators at this point said that if I hit like a Nisa and an Extinction event, and I can like cast this Extinction event, sweep my opponent's tokens, and attack the Teferi. But the problem is my opponent has counter spells, and they've been drawing a ton of cards. Like I know that they have this disallow, so I'm just decided that I'm 0% to win this game, like literally 0, unless my opponent, I don't even know, has a stroke, in which case what I'm doing is still right. So I need to prolong it as much as possible because my opponent's been playing pretty slowly. They don't have that much of a clock, and game 2 and 3 could take a really long time. Clock is a serious consideration. I think my opponent was down to like 15 minutes at this point, so I decided to go for that. And yeah, so now my opponent just counters my Thought Seize. So now I would have been able to like play Extinction Event and Nisa, or actually no, I think it was on the third Extinction Event that I took it over a Nisa. I think I still would have taken a Nisa on the second one, but yeah, I mean either way it really wouldn't have mattered. Like it takes them a couple extra turns to ult Teferi, whatever. And now they've got the Teferi ultimate, the Teferi emblem out, and they just start hitting my lands, and it's just super over for me. There's really no coming back at this point. They're just exiling permanents. Now I play Nisa, I think, right? Because that's what I had in hand. Just like play stuff that I have to deal with, which takes more time. But yeah, it just really doesn't go well for me here. Yeah, see, I'm manually tapping, so I'd be able to still activate this Castle Lochthwain, because more cards equals more things I have to deal with, and they just 1 mana, draw a card, kill you to Planeswalker, exile it even, and it's just like, what am I even doing, you know? Like, could have even like cast Memory, exile 7 lands, like, it just all sucks. But it's cool. I mean, I haven't seen a Teferi Emblem in a while, so even if I was getting absolutely wrecked by it, I decided not even to draw here because I think losing life was not worth it. I think the top card of my library was worth less life, or was going to gain me less time than the 4 life. Yeah, so now my opponent just starts removing my lands, plays a second Draft Digger's Cage. They didn't use Castle Ardenvale here, but whatever. And I think my opponent could have played a little bit faster here to retain more time on their clock. They were being pretty cautious, which I can respect, of course. I mean, caution is, of course, a good thing to have, but I mean, at this point, like, they weren't really going to lose the game, right? And I didn't know that they had a bunch of lands in hand, but I don't know. And at this point, I would have liked to see a memory cast because that just exiles all my lands at once, but unfortunately, what I've just realized is that there's a Grafdigger's Cage in play, so my opponent cannot do that. But I mean, it still would have been cool if they did, right? Or if they could have. I'm sure they would have if they could have. Man, Grafdigger's Cage. They're playing them in the main deck too, and now here I'm just going for Maelstrom Pulse to get me some 3/3s. Like I was just like fully committed to not losing the game. And yeah, my opponent just keeps both on top, which, yeah, I mean, they cycle, so that's just essentially 2 mana, exile a permanent, draw a card. Like, wow, why would you ever bottom that, you know? And they just start going to work on my lands, Wrath, my 2 3/3s, and it just gets progressively worse and worse for me. Yeah. Now with double Castle Ardenvale, they're also just killing me faster. I just cast a Fatal Push just for them to respond to it. They didn't even go for the double Teferi Emblem, which was honestly a little bit disrespectful because, like, why not do it when you can, you know? If you can literally ult Teferi twice, like, why wouldn't you? But instead, they just go for the win the game play of just draw a card, exile the last lands. So yeah, and at this point, this goes on for a little bit more. I have like no lands in play, and yeah, and now we go to sideboarding, And my opponent, so I'm bringing in, taking out all my removal, bringing in my negates and my Narsets, my disdainful strokes. My opponent brings in a bunch of answers for Uro, Rest in Peace, and Grafter's Cage, which I thought was maybe a little bit overpowered, but I'm not really sure. They take out some Ras, they take out some removal, which I agree with, of course. And I was feeling pretty bad after that game one, because I just got destroyed, but I knew that my opponent did not have that much time on the clock, so if I could win game 2, I don't think my opponent would be able to win game 3 in time. So that was obviously a plus, though I can imagine that by the 5 minutes left in this, you can guess that I did not, in fact, win the next game. But it was still a pretty interesting one. Definitely more interesting than the first, I think. And my opponent keeps just a hand with 2 Narsets and Grafter's Cage. Grafter's Cage is just like really good against Uro, but I'm not sure if it's good against my deck in general. Especially since I've got Casualties of War. The fact that, like, yes, on one hand, it can. And it's actually nice because now I get to commentate on my own hand. Because there's Sorcerer Spyglass. So they named Nisa, which, yeah. I mean, it's like the one thing in my deck with a good activated ability, apart from Castle Lockthwaite. Which makes sense. My opponent was just playing, like, it's sort of weird, but they were playing this game where they've got a bunch of, like, cards that answer a single card in my deck, but all of it. And it's honestly just good in this matchup because this matchup is just so long and grindy. Yeah, now I played an untapped Reading Pool, but I Growth Spiral trying to hit a Thoughtseize rather than just holding up Negate, which I think was quite possibly a mistake, because now I see 2 Narsets, and again, I just go, oh no, it's so bad, because getting out from under a Narset is hard in this matchup. For the Sultai player, and I mean also for the blue-white player to some extent, because you're just drawing so many cards. Like now I can cast this Colossus, but it doesn't draw me cards. So I need to essentially waste a bunch of value just killing this Narset, and now that means that I'm stuck on not very much since I can't even cast Ur from the graveyard. I've just got this Singleton Negate to hold on to. Had I just held up Negate rather than going for the Thoughtseize, which was possibly a little bit greedy, but I didn't expect 2 Narsets. I think they had like 3 between the main deck and sideboard. That would all be in game 2. But yeah, it was pretty unfortunate. And now they drew a pretty dead Rest in Peace. So I was just kind of laughing at this point because, or I guess they didn't play it now, but whenever they did play it, I was just like, okay. Because it's a little bit overkill, I think, but yeah, I mean, at least they weren't going to get... My opponent did come with a plan. They were going to not lose. They were not going to lose to Uro, and they, in fact, did not lose to Uro. So that was both their graveyards gone. And yeah, and I've just got this Negate and nothing else to work with. And my opponent has this Sphinx of the Revelation, which is really bad for me. And I just keep drawing lands here. It's a little bit frustrating. I flooded out pretty hard. My opponent commits my Crosses, which I thought was really weird because I'm going to draw it in a couple of turns. My opponent does have the disallow for the draw trigger, but I still think it was a little bit unnecessary. They weren't under that much pressure. Again, like I know I might sound a little bit critical of my opponent here, but I think they played well overall. It's just a couple points, and obviously, like it's easy to spot mistakes when you're watching someone else play. Though I do think that Mythic Richard played admirably, and he of course did end up taking out the tournament, and he got to the top 8 the hard way. And yeah, now my opponent gets to do this pretty neat play where they disallow my Crosses. Actually, I want to talk about something that happened like a minute ago, where they cast their card draw spell, and they left up 2 mana to cast their counter spell, and then I negated, and then it just didn't counter it, which I think, I mean, maybe they should have gone for 4 cards if they weren't going to counter it, but I mean, either way it wouldn't have mattered, right? It got countered, so it didn't really matter how much mana they spent into it. I just thought it was a little bit odd. Now they've got this Dovin's Veto. I've got cards at the top of my library, so now my Nisa gets vetoed, my opponent just makes a bunch of 1/1s. And actually, they don't make a bunch of 1/1s, they scry, which is better, and they hit a Teferi, which is just really bad for me. And now they draw, and they hit an Absorb. And this is where this game ended, because I had a Casualties of War in hand. And if I could resolve the Casualties of War, I was going to hit all their graveyard hate, or rather, I was going to hit their Rest in Peace, their Sorcerer Spyglass, their Teferi, and their Castle of Vantress. So I've hit their card advantage engine, I've hit their Teferi, I've hit their Sorcerer Spyglass, so Nissa is now online, but they have the Absorb, and there isn't really much I could do. If they didn't have it there, if they didn't draw that Absorb that one turn, I was in a great spot because my opponent has to kill me in 11 minutes, which is certainly easier said than done. And now, like, they did draw the Narset, but they also missed. So, or missed as in, like, they didn't hit something great, which I'm a little bit surprised that Baffling End is still in, but whatever. Yeah, I'm not here to nitpick. Baffling End does hit Uro, so I guess that's pretty good. Though my opponent just has so many answers to Uro, it's kind of ridiculous. Like, I know that Uro is really good, but is it that good? And here my opponent's just casting these Miria's calls, and the game ends pretty quickly after that. And it's unfortunate because obviously that one Absorb draw, but whatever, like, it was high time for my luck to run out, you know. I already got here through getting a bunch of buys in a row, so I'm not too upset, you know. And of course, second place is also very nice. And yeah, this is where the story ends. And yeah, overall, I think the first two matches I played not that great. There was just a couple spots where I made some dumb mistakes and or dumb misclicks. But I think I played the third match actually really well. I was pretty proud, and I'm a little bit upset that I couldn't show it from my point of view. But that being said, I mean, it was still a great weekend. I got second. I'm pretty happy about that. I got the buys, which is nice. And yeah, so that's really going to be it for the video. And well, I guess thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, and if you enjoyed this style of video, then you can let me know by dropping a like. You can subscribe to the channel for more high quality audio videos, for all of you that have seen my previous videos. And clicked away because of the terrible audio. I don't blame you, but now I don't really have that excuse, so yeah, I guess. And that's really it. I will put the Planeswalker Diaries Patreon link in the description, or their podcast or whatever. I'll put something in the description where you can find them. The tournament was wonderful. They did a great job hosting it, especially since I got the 2 buys. And it was overall really fun. I also won $100, which is cool. And yeah, that's it from me, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.